let go most of their champions. John Fitch went to Bellator. Blagoy Ivanov is going to the UFC. Their flyweight guy went to the UFC. Of course, we know Justin Gaethje, he went to the UFC. It's like most of their guys went to the UFC. David Branch went to the UFC. Andrei Arlovsky, Anthony Johnson. Now, granted, Arlovsky and Johnson were not champions at the time, but it's Jessica Aguilar. They let all their guys go. Oh, Yoshino Kami too. And it was understandable when they let Rusmar Palhares go. The guy just has issues. But to see these many guys take off like that, I would argue that at one point, back when they were World Series of Fighting, they had probably... One could argue they may have had the number 2 promotion just on talent alone, just because of all those guys who would come out. I think James Shields is still in the promotion, but because of like the sheer amount of talent these guys had was almost comparable to like the middle UFC division. Some of the guys were ranked pretty highly that went over there. The middle UFC division, definitely Bellator. They had just so much talent, and all these guys just left. I don't understand why you wouldn't have. Bellator has at times let go their champions. They let Michael Johnson go. They let Eddie Alvarez go. They've let guys go, but which was but they voluntarily let these guys go. These were not guys who had finished out their contracts. And one thing also to remember, the UFC, when they drop their contracts, they have champions clauses in every single contract. That means if you're champion and your contract comes up, you've got a one fight extension because you got to finish out that champions clause. In the majority of cases, most fighters just sign a new contract, and that takes care of that whole situation. But it's just one of those things where I wouldn't understand. I can understand because originally I don't think they were necessarily looking to compete big time with the UFC. They were definitely looking, though, to make an impact, and they did in a very big manner. But to not have your champions, like champions clauses or something like that on your contract, that's it's because, like I said, Bellator voluntarily let their champions go. Those guys did not finish out their contracts and then have free agency and leave. Those guys finished out their contracts, and UFC and Bellator just decided to let those guys go. A lot of those happened under Bjorn Rebney, who I would argue in some ways didn't make the best business decisions in the long term, especially when you consider that a lot of the champions they let go, most of them ended up going to the UFC. Michael Johnson went to the UFC, Eddie Alvarez went to the UFC. Alvarez was a Scott Coker thing. He could tell that he wasn't happy. I think Michael Johnson was too. But either way. But yeah, to just see all of this happen, to me, it's just baffling. Because, like I said, World Series of Fighting, now the Professional Fighters League, at one point was arguably you could almost argue the number 2 promotion in the world. But they're not there anymore. Because they just kept letting their champions, letting their champions go. To me, this just doesn't make sense. And, they still have a good roster. I've looked at their roster with what they've done. They're still a good roster, but it's nowhere near what it was. It just is not what it was.